Amara Ochieng had lived in Berlin for 11 months, and she still ran for trains. Not because she was never late, but because something about the city's precision made her feel she was always half a step behind it. She hit the platform at Alexanderplatz at 7:43 with her tote bag slapping against her hip, her scarf half wound, and her coffee, the one she'd paid €3.40 for at the bakery on Münzstrasse, tilting dangerously in her hand. The S-Bahn doors slid open. She stepped in. She collided with a wall, except walls didn't have hands. This wall caught her coffee before it became a disaster, then steadied her by the elbow, and for a brief, humiliating second, Amara pressed her palm flat against a very expensive shirt and felt a heartbeat that was calmer than hers had any right to be. "Entschuldigung," she said automatically, stumbling back. The man said nothing. He just handed her the coffee cup, perfectly upright, not a drop spilled. She looked up, and she made the mistake, the one she would replay every night for weeks, of meeting his eyes. They were the color of winter light on gray water, and they were, with a calm that bordered on unsettling, entirely fixed on her. He was the kind of handsome that didn't ask for permission, sharp jaw, dark hair threaded with the first traces of silver at the temples, a stillness that didn't read as coldness but as something coiled, patient. She looked away, found a pole to grip, stared at her own reflection in the dark window of the train as Berlin slid past outside, thinking, "I'm going to be late. That's all." That was nothing. She thought that all the way to Friedrichstrasse, where he also got off, of course he did, and where she lost him in the crowd before she could decide whether she'd imagined the way he'd watched her, or whether something in this city had just quietly shifted. The man who owned the room before he entered it. Amara was a doctoral student in urban planning at the Technische Universität Berlin. Her thesis was about gentrification and displacement in post-reunification Miete. She had a grant, a cramped apartment in Neukölln, a supervisor who misspelled her name on emails, and no time for anything that did not advance her chapter outline. This is what she told herself when she arrived at the symposium at the Europa Center and saw him. He was at the front of the room, speaking with two men in suits, and the entire panel of academics and city officials orbited him the way moons orbit something heavy. He spoke quietly. The room leaned in. She found a seat in the third row and opened her notebook and willed herself to read her notes on housing policy. The moderator introduced him, Felix Brandt, CEO of Brandt Immobilien AG, one of the largest real estate development firms in Germany. Forbes Europe, 3 years running. Amara's pen stopped moving. Brandt Immobilien AG, the company whose luxury tower project on Rivalerstrasse she had spent 6 months researching as a case study in exactly what went wrong with Berlin's affordable housing crisis. She looked up at him. He was already looking at her. Not aggressively. Not in the way that made women want to fold themselves smaller. He looked the way someone looks when they've recognized something they weren't expecting to find and haven't yet decided what to do about it. The same eyes from the train. Of course, she wrote, very deliberately in her notebook, "Do not let him see that you know who he is." And then underneath it, "Do not let him see that you noticed him first." The break between panels was 20 minutes. Amara got herself a water, positioned herself near the window overlooking the Kurfürstendamm, and called her mother in Kisumu. "How is it going? Are you eating?" "Mama, I'm at a conference." "Conference food is not food. I'll send you." "Mama." She heard him before she saw him, not his voice, but the way the ambient noise of the room redistributed itself when he moved through it. A subtle pressure change, the way people turned without meaning to. He stopped beside her at the window. He did not look at her. He looked at the street below. "I'll call you back," she said into the phone, and hung up before her mother could protest. Silence. Then, in German, "You were on my train this morning." Your train, she repeated in English, because she had decided 3 seconds ago that she was not going to make this easy. Does Deutsche Bahn know? Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile exactly, the shadow of one. Felix Brandt, he said, switching to English without missing a beat. His accent was precise, barely there, like he'd filed it down deliberately. I know who you are, she said, and you are Amara Ochieng, doctoral researcher, TU Berlin. My thesis, she added, watching his face, is on the housing displacement caused by high-end development in central Mitte. Your Rivalerstrasse project is chapter 4. Now he did look at her, fully, with an attention that felt almost physical. Chapter 4, he said. It's not a flattering chapter. A beat. Then, I assumed not. The bell rang for the next session. Neither of them moved immediately. I would like to read it, he said, not as a request. The way powerful men don't make requests, but with something underneath the words that was careful, genuinely careful. When it's finished, she picked up her notebook. When it's finished, it'll be published. You can read it like everyone else. She walked back to her seat before he could respond. Her hands were completely steady. She was very proud of that. She didn't mean to end up at the same bar. The panel had run long, the U-Bahn was delayed, and her colleague Priya had texted, drinks, the place with the green awning. Now, and that was how Amara found herself on a bar stool at 8:15, with a glass of Riesling she hadn't paid for yet, watching the door. She was not watching for anyone in particular. He came in at 8:22, alone. No entourage, she'd half expected one. He looked around, saw her in the same half-second she registered him, and this was the thing she couldn't quite file away neatly. He looked almost relieved. Priya had conveniently disappeared to the bathroom for what was becoming an impressive stretch of time. He sat down across from her without being invited. She didn't tell him not to. Coincidence? She asked. Probably not, he said. I asked the conference assistant where the researchers usually went after sessions. She stared at him. You asked? Yes. That's very direct. I was told Germans are direct. I'm not German. No. You're Kenyan. You grew up in Kisumu, came to Berlin on a DAAD fellowship, and you've apparently spent 6 months building a case against everything I've built in this city. He said it without defensiveness. Just information. I read your published paper, the one in the Urban Studies Journal, last spring. The Riesling suddenly tasted very different. You read my paper? Before today, he said, I didn't know it was you. She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had been in boardrooms she'd never enter, who had reshaped skylines, who had, according to 2 years of her research, priced hundreds of families out of neighborhoods they'd lived in for decades, who had also, this morning, caught her coffee without being asked. What do you want, Mr. Brandt? He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone calculating, the quiet of someone deciding how honest to be. I think, he said finally, I want to argue with you, properly, about the things you wrote. And I think I want you to change my mind. Amara set down her wine, looked at the table, looked back up. That's a very vulnerable thing for a man like you to say. Yes, he agreed. It is. The bar filled up around them. Berlin outside the window went electric with evening, the tram humming past, the lights catching the puddles, the city indifferent and gorgeous, and neither of them moved to leave. They argued about housing models until 10 o'clock. He was wrong about several things and right about 2, and she told him so about both. And he listened, really listened, in the way that powerful men rarely do, with his arms folded on the table and his eyes on her face. At 10:10, Priya materialized from nowhere, widened her eyes at Amara in a way that communicated an entire paragraph, and announced she was taking a taxi home. And then it was just them again, in the thinning bar, and outside the rain had started. What the rain asked. They stood under the green awning, watching the rain sheet across Tucholskystrasse. His car was 2 blocks away. Her U-Bahn was 3 minutes' walk. These were known practical facts, and neither of them moved toward either. "You're not what I expected," she said. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. "What did you expect?" She thought about it honestly. "Someone easier to be angry at." He made a sound. That was almost a laugh. "And I expected someone easier to dismiss." "Did you try?" "For about 30 seconds, he said. "On the train." The rain came down harder. A taxi splashed past. Amara pulled her scarf a little tighter and thought about the 11 months she'd spent building a life in this city, the library at TU, where she could find any book she needed, the market in Neukölln, where the vendor who sold plantains always overcharged her, and she bought them anyway out of sheer stubbornness, the way Berlin had started to feel, not like home, but like a place that was letting her in slowly, on its own terms. She thought about her mother's voice on the phone. "Are you eating?" Which always meant, "Are you safe? Are you happy? Are you still you?" She thought about the fact that the man standing next to her had read her work, that he had found her, that he had sat across from her for 2 hours and never once treated her like a curiosity or an accessory to his own narrative or anything other than someone whose thinking mattered. It was a small thing, maybe, or maybe it was the whole thing. "I have a presentation on Friday," she said, "with my supervisor. Chapter 4. How long after that are you free?" She looked at him sidelong. "You move fast." "I move deliberately," he said. "There's a difference." It was quiet for a moment, except for the rain. "Coffee," she said finally. "Not a date. I'm not ready to call it anything." "Coffee," he agreed, and then very quietly, "Amara," just her name. The way he said it, careful, like he was learning the weight of it, made her heart do something she refused to catalog. She stepped out into the rain before she could say anything else, because she knew herself well enough to know that if she stayed under that awning another 5 minutes, she would say something true and irreversible. On the U-Bahn home, the train rattled south through the city. Amara watched her reflection in the dark glass again, same way she had this morning. Same face, same woman. And she noticed that something had shifted in it, a looseness around the mouth, eyes a little less braced. She opened her notebook. She had written that morning, "Do not let him see that you noticed him first." She crossed it out. Below it, she wrote 3 words, underlined once, like a research note, like a fact she was choosing to record. "He saw me first." She had come to Berlin to study. She had come to understand cities, how they grew, who they left behind, what they cost. She had not come to fall in love with the most powerful man in any room she entered. But Berlin, she was learning, did not ask what you'd planned for. It only asked what you were brave enough to keep.